Hello everyone. Before we begin today's story, I have a small favor to ask. Please hit subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you never miss our channel's new videos. It's quick, free, and the best way to support us in bringing you more dramatic stories. Your support means the world to us. Where are you watching from? Drop your city or country in the comments below. Thank you very much. Now, let's dive into today's tale. Our story begins with a man who seems to have everything: wealth, power, and a life that many would envy. His name is Nathaniel James, a 38-year-old billionaire who built his empire from the ground up. On the outside, Nathaniel's life is perfect. He's a successful businessman with a luxurious mansion, expensive cars, and the kind of fame that most people can only dream of. But there's something missing. Despite all his accomplishments, Nathaniel is completely alone. His friends are mostly business contacts, and his family is either distant or estranged. His personal life? Non-existent. He's surrounded by people, yet feels utterly isolated. As Nathaniel sits in his opulent office overlooking the city skyline, he finds himself staring at the latest invitation to a high-profile gala. It's an event he's been invited to for years, but this time, something feels different. He knows he needs a date, someone to accompany him to maintain his image. He can't afford to show up alone. People will talk, and in his world, reputation is everything. But Nathaniel's problem is not the lack of social opportunities, it's the fact that his personal life has been a series of failed relationships. He's had his share of flings and one-night stands, but he has never been able to find someone who truly fits the mold of a wife. He's too busy, too focused on his business, and too protective of his heart. The idea of a relationship, let alone a marriage, seems impossible for someone like him. But what if he could have the appearance of a perfect life without all the mess that comes with it? And that's when the idea strikes him: what if he could hire a wife? It sounds absurd, but at this point, Nathaniel is willing to try anything. He's not looking for love, he's looking for a partner who will help him maintain his image, someone who will show up at events, attend family gatherings, and do all the things a wife would do, without the emotional baggage. He doesn't need someone to fall in love with, he just needs someone to play the role. It doesn't take long for Nathaniel to find her, a woman named Sophia Williams. Sophia is a 27-year-old woman with a difficult past and no other options on the table. She's smart, independent, and incredibly resourceful, but life hasn't been kind to her. With her family in financial ruin and her career aspirations limited, she's willing to take a drastic step to change her circumstances. When Nathaniel offers her the opportunity to be his wife for a set period, with a generous salary and all expenses paid, she has no choice but to accept. Now, let's pause and think about this for a moment. Nathaniel is a man who prides himself on control. Everything in his life is calculated, including his relationships, or lack thereof. But Sophia is different. She's not just a trophy wife or a pretty face to stand beside him at events. She's a woman with her own set of dreams, aspirations, and a hidden strength that Nathaniel doesn't expect. And that is where the miracle begins. But let's not jump ahead. Before we find out how things unfold between Nathaniel and Sophia, let's take a moment to look at where they both stand. For Nathaniel, this is just a transaction. But for Sophia, this is her last shot at turning her life around. Neither of them knows it yet, but this unlikely arrangement will change both of their lives in ways they never imagined. Stay tuned to see how this seemingly simple contract turns into something far more complicated and life-changing for both Nathaniel and Sophia. Now, let's continue with the story. After agreeing to the unusual arrangement, Sophia Williams stood in front of Nathaniel's grand mansion, feeling a mixture of excitement and anxiety. This wasn't the life she had imagined for herself, but it was an opportunity she couldn't afford to pass up. She had heard about Nathaniel James. He was a household name, a self-made billionaire who had built an empire, and yet, his personal life was a complete mystery. Nobody really knew much about him, other than the fact that he was private, powerful, and perpetually single. This contract, this job, felt like both a blessing and a burden. Sophia wasn't exactly sure what to expect, but she knew one thing: she had to make this work. Inside the mansion, Nathaniel was waiting. He sat behind his massive desk, flipping through paperwork, his sharp eyes never missing a detail. He wasn't nervous, not really. He had done plenty of business deals, but this was something different. His mind kept returning to the thought of Sophia, his temporary wife. He wasn't expecting anything personal from her. After all, this was just a business deal. Yet, there was a small, irrational part of him that was curious. What would it be like to have someone by his side? Even if only for show? When Sophia arrived, she looked out of place at first, almost out of breath as she entered the grand foyer of Nathaniel's home. It wasn't her world, this lavish, cold, high-tech palace. She felt small in it, and yet, she stood tall, determined to play her part. Nathaniel looked up from his desk and stood to greet her. His gaze was intense, piercing, as if analyzing her every move. He was still the same man she had seen in the media, intimidating, controlled, and, in a way, unreachable. "Welcome," Nathaniel said, his voice smooth and businesslike. "I'm glad you could make it." His tone was polite, but there was a coldness to it, a professionalism that kept everything at arm's length. Sophia gave a small nod, trying her best to hide her nerves. "Thank you for having me," she replied, keeping her voice steady. She wasn't here to make friends. She was here to do a job. A job that would change her life forever, for better or worse. The first few days were awkward. They barely spoke outside of the essentials. Nathaniel would give her instructions on where to be and when, and Sophia would follow them. They attended high-profile events together, gala dinners, charity functions, and corporate meetings, and to the outside world, they looked like the perfect couple. But behind closed doors, things were far from ideal. Nathaniel would retreat to his office for long hours, and Sophia would spend time in her own quarters, trying to keep herself busy. It was a partnership of convenience, nothing more. However, as the weeks passed, things started to shift. Nathaniel began relying on Sophia for more than just appearances. He noticed that she wasn't just a pretty face, she had a certain grace and intelligence about her that made her stand out. In conversations, she was insightful, quick-witted, and despite her humble background, she seemed to carry herself with a kind of quiet confidence. Slowly, she became more than just a wife for show, she became someone he could talk to. Sophia, on the other hand, began to notice changes in herself. She wasn't used to this kind of lifestyle. She had grown up in a small, modest home, where every dollar counted. Now, she was living in a mansion, driving expensive cars, and attending events that most people could only dream of. But it wasn't just the material luxuries that started to affect her, it was Nathaniel. There was something about him that was different from the man the media painted him to be. He was reserved, sure, but there was an underlying vulnerability to him that Sophia began to see in the small moments. When he thought no one was watching, he would let down his guard. And it was during those moments that she realized he wasn't as invincible as he seemed. But Sophia couldn't afford to get attached. She couldn't afford to let her heart soften towards him. After all, this was still just a contract. She was here to play a role, and she had to remind herself of that every day. As much as she wanted to believe that this could turn into something real, she knew it wouldn't. Nathaniel had his own demons, his own walls built up higher than any mansion, and she wasn't the person to break them down. Yet, despite all the barriers between them, something started to shift. Nathaniel noticed her more, noticed the way she cared for the people around her, the way she listened, and the way she made him feel less alone. Sophia, too, began to find herself drawn to him in ways she hadn't anticipated. Was it the allure of his wealth? Or was it something more? Something deeper, something she couldn't quite put into words? As the days passed, both Nathaniel and Sophia found themselves questioning what this arrangement was really about. Was it just about appearances? Or had something real begun to form between them, something neither of them expected? They were still trying to figure that out. But one thing was clear, their lives were about to change in ways they never imagined. It had been a few months since Nathaniel and Sophia began their unusual arrangement. And things were starting to change in ways neither of them expected. What started as a cold, business-like partnership was now a complicated web of unspoken feelings, subtle shifts, and complicated emotions. On the surface, they were still the picture-perfect couple at every public event, glamorous, poised, and always together. But in private, things were beginning to blur. Nathaniel found himself looking at Sophia in ways he hadn't planned. He wasn't supposed to get emotionally involved. This was never meant to be anything but a transactional arrangement. Yet, despite his best efforts to keep his distance, he couldn't help but notice how comfortable he had become around her. Her laughter, her presence, it was all starting to feel real. And that scared him. The walls he had built around his heart for so many years were starting to crack, and he wasn't sure how to stop it. Sophia, for her part, was just as conflicted. She had come into this agreement thinking it would be a simple, temporary arrangement. A way to escape the financial struggles she had been enduring for so long. She never thought that, over time, she would start to care for Nathaniel. He wasn't the cold, distant man he appeared to be. Yes, he had his flaws, his reluctance to open up, his tendency to control everything around him, but Sophia had begun to see glimpses of the person underneath all of that. The man who was lonely, who longed for connection, who was hiding behind a mask of power and wealth. She found herself thinking about him more than she should have, and it made her uneasy. She wasn't supposed to fall for him. She was here to fulfill a contract, nothing more. One evening, Nathaniel invited her to dinner at the mansion. It was just the two of them, no guests, no business associates. The table was set with fine china, a quiet atmosphere that felt almost intimate. Nathaniel was usually all business, but tonight, he seemed different. He was unusually quiet, lost in thought, his eyes often drifting to her when he thought she wasn't looking. Sophia could feel the tension between them, the unspoken words hanging in the air. She had always been good at reading people, and tonight, it seemed like Nathaniel was struggling with something. "Is something on your mind?" she asked, her voice gentle. She wasn't sure why she asked. It wasn't like they ever shared personal thoughts with each other, but something about the quiet made her feel the need to break the silence. Nathaniel looked up at her, his expression guarded. He hesitated for a moment before answering. "I'm just thinking," he said slowly, "about how strange all of this is. I never thought I'd have someone like you in my life, and I don't know if that's a good thing or a bad thing." His words caught Sophia off guard. She hadn't expected him to open up, even just a little. It made her heart flutter unexpectedly, and she quickly tried to hide her reaction. "I'm here to do a job, Nathaniel." "Nothing more," she replied, trying to keep her voice steady. "You don't have to worry about me getting attached. This is just a contract." But even as she said the words, she knew they weren't entirely true. She had already started to get attached, and she was trying to convince herself that it didn't matter. Nathaniel wasn't hers to love, and she couldn't let herself fall into that trap. It was dangerous. She had her own reasons for taking this job, reasons that didn't involve emotions. Nathaniel's gaze softened slightly, but his walls were still up. "I didn't hire you for any of this," he said quietly. "I didn't expect to care about someone again. But you make me think about things differently. I can't ignore that, no matter how much I try." The air between them was thick with unspoken tension. Sophia didn't know what to say. She wanted to tell him that she understood, that she too had started to feel something more than she was supposed to. But she didn't know how to say it, or if she even should. As the evening wore on, the conversation shifted to safer topics, business, upcoming events, things that didn't matter. But the spark was there, lingering, as if everything that hadn't been said was now hanging between them. Later that night, as Sophia lay in her guest room, staring up at the ceiling, she couldn't shake the feeling that something had changed. Nathaniel had let down his guard, even if just a little. And in doing so, he had opened up a door that neither of them was ready to walk through. She wondered if she could continue living this way, half in and half out of something that was slowly becoming more real. Could she keep pretending it was just a contract when her heart was pulling her in a different direction? Could Nathaniel? The next morning, as they went through their usual routine, attending a charity event, sitting through meetings, smiling for photos, it was clear that something between them had shifted. They were still playing their roles, still pretending for the world. But in the quiet moments, when no one was watching, they both knew the truth. This was no longer just a business arrangement. It was something more. And neither of them knew where it would lead. The days following their dinner had a different energy. Nathaniel and Sophia found themselves in the same spaces, doing the same things, but something had shifted. They were no longer just performing for the outside world, they were aware of each other in ways they hadn't been before. It was subtle at first, a small change in the way Nathaniel looked at Sophia when they passed each other in the hallway, the way his smile lingered just a little longer than necessary. Sophia couldn't ignore it. She had noticed the change in him too. He was letting his guard down in small, almost imperceptible ways, and for the first time, she was unsure about where this was heading. Was this still just a contract? Or were they walking down a path neither of them had planned for? The truth was, Sophia was struggling. She had told herself from the beginning that she wouldn't get involved emotionally, that this was just a job. But the more time she spent with Nathaniel, the more she felt drawn to him. She saw beyond the billionaire facade. She saw the man who worked tirelessly, who had a sharp mind and an even sharper wit, but who was also vulnerable, lonely, and uncertain about the life he had built for himself. And despite her best efforts, she couldn't help but feel sympathy for him. She saw how much he tried to control everything around him, and yet, how little control he had over his own heart. Nathaniel, on the other hand, found himself thinking about Sophia more than he should. She had become an unexpected presence in his life. At first, it was simply because she was his hired wife, a companion he needed to maintain appearances. But now, it was more than that. He found himself seeking her out, not just for events or business matters, but because, for reasons he couldn't explain, she made him feel human again. She was the only person who didn't treat him like a symbol of wealth and power. She didn't seem to care about his status or his bank account. She treated him like a man, not a legend. And somewhere along the way, that had started to matter to him more than he cared to admit. One evening, Nathaniel invited Sophia to join him for a private dinner at his favorite restaurant, a place he rarely visited, preferring to keep his meals at home or in more public settings. But tonight, something felt different. He wanted to get away from the spotlight, away from the cameras and the crowds. He wanted a quiet evening with her, even if he didn't fully understand why. It wasn't just about the contract anymore. He wasn't sure what it was, but he knew it was something. When they arrived, the restaurant was empty, save for a few staff members. The dim lighting and soft music created an intimate atmosphere. Sophia felt a little out of place in her evening gown, but she couldn't deny that she was intrigued by this side of Nathaniel. This wasn't the man who dominated boardrooms or made cold, calculated decisions. This was someone different. As they sat down, Nathaniel leaned back in his chair, studying her with a thoughtful expression. "Why did you agree to this?" Nathaniel asked suddenly, his voice soft. The question caught Sophia off guard. She wasn't used to him asking anything so personal. She thought for a moment, choosing her words carefully. "I didn't have much choice," she replied honestly. "I needed a way out, a way to change my situation. It wasn't what I planned, but it was the best I could do at the time." She paused, then added, "But I never expected it to be like this." "I didn't expect," she trailed off, unsure how to put her feelings into words. Nathaniel nodded, but there was a hint of sadness in his eyes. "You didn't expect to start caring, did you?" he asked quietly. The words hung in the air, and for a moment, neither of them spoke. The weight of what had been said settled between them, unspoken and undeniable. Sophia looked down at her glass of wine, swirling it slowly as she tried to gather her thoughts. She couldn't deny the truth in his words. There had been moments, small moments, when she had begun to care about him. When she had felt something more than the cold contract that bound them together. But she wasn't sure what to do with those feelings. She had a life outside of this contract, and she couldn't afford to get lost in it. And yet, here she was, feeling more connected to Nathaniel than she ever thought possible. As dinner continued, they spoke about other things, their pasts, their goals, their hopes for the future. For the first time in a long time, they shared more than just pleasantries. Nathaniel, who was normally guarded, seemed to open up in ways Sophia hadn't expected. She found herself revealing things about her own life, about the struggles she had faced, the sacrifices she had made. And as the night wore on, the distance between them seemed to shrink. By the end of the evening, as they walked out of the restaurant, neither of them knew exactly where they stood. There was a feeling in the air, something unspoken, something that neither of them was ready to confront. But one thing was clear, the boundaries between them were no longer as clear-cut as they once were. What had started as a business arrangement had transformed into something much more complicated. And neither of them knew what to do about it. As they got into the car, Nathaniel's hand brushed against hers. It was just a brief touch, but it was enough to send a shock through both of them. Neither of them pulled away. And in that moment, both Nathaniel and Sophia realized that what was happening between them was no longer just about a contract. It was something more, something that neither of them could control. The days after their dinner continued with an uneasy tension, a palpable shift in the air between Nathaniel and Sophia. They were still performing their roles, attending events, smiling for photos, and giving the world the illusion of the perfect couple. But behind closed doors, everything was different. The distance that had once defined their relationship now felt more like a chasm neither of them was sure how to cross. The walls that Nathaniel had so carefully built around himself were slowly crumbling, but he didn't know how to handle it. He had spent so many years living in control, suppressing any emotions that didn't serve him. And now, with Sophia, he was feeling things he had long buried. The touch of her hand, the warmth in her eyes, and the way she made him laugh all seemed to remind him that there was more to life than just business and power. Sophia, too, felt the weight of their growing connection. She had been careful, so careful, to keep her distance from Nathaniel. But every conversation, every look, every moment spent together chipped away at the resolve she had built. She had come into this contract with one goal, to escape her financial troubles and make a better life for herself. But now, she was questioning everything. Was this really just a business arrangement? Or was it becoming something deeper, something that could change both of their lives forever? The more she tried to push those feelings aside, the more she realized they weren't going away. Nathaniel had become more than just her employer, he had become someone she cared about. And that scared her. One afternoon, they found themselves alone at the mansion, both with a rare moment of free time. Nathaniel had just returned from a long business trip, and Sophia had been spending the day in the garden, enjoying a rare moment of solitude. When Nathaniel entered the house, he saw her through the large windows, sitting by the fountain, looking lost in thought. He hesitated for a moment before walking outside to join her. The moment he stepped into the garden, the cool breeze seemed to carry away some of the tension that had been building between them. "I didn't expect to find you out here," Nathaniel said softly, his voice low. Sophia looked up, startled by his sudden presence, but she quickly regained her composure. "I just needed some air," she replied, her voice a little more strained than she intended. She wasn't sure if she wanted to talk to him right now, but she couldn't deny the pull that was still there. She had become accustomed to his company, to the way he made her feel, safe, understood, and even, in moments, happy. Nathaniel stood beside her, both of them staring at the water for a long moment in silence. The air between them was thick, heavy with all the things they hadn't said. "I don't know what's happening between us, Sophia," Nathaniel said finally, his voice quieter now, almost vulnerable. "I told myself this was just a contract. That we'd go through the motions and nothing more. But it feels like something else is happening." Sophia turned her head to look at him, her heart beating faster. She had been waiting for this moment, or maybe avoiding it. She wasn't sure. She had tried to convince herself that this was all just temporary. That once the contract ended, they would both walk away with what they wanted. But now, hearing the uncertainty in his voice, she couldn't deny the truth any longer. "I've been feeling the same way," she admitted quietly, her eyes meeting his. "I didn't want to. I told myself it was just a job. But it's not just a job anymore, is it?" Nathaniel's eyes softened as he reached out, almost unconsciously, his hand brushing against hers. It was a small gesture, but it sent a shock through both of them. For a moment, neither of them spoke. They just stood there, the connection between them undeniable. Nathaniel could feel his heart beating in his chest, but he didn't know what to do with the emotions that had suddenly surfaced. He had never been good with feelings, never had the time or the energy to deal with them. But with Sophia, it was different. She made him feel things he had buried for so long. Sophia, on the other hand, was fighting the urge to pull away. She couldn't let herself get caught up in this. She couldn't let herself fall for him, no matter how much her heart wanted to. She had worked so hard to get to this point, this life, this opportunity, and she couldn't let herself be distracted by something as complicated as love. Not with someone like Nathaniel. He had his own life, his own world. And she was just a temporary part of it. But in that moment, as they stood side by side in the garden, something shifted. They both knew it. The contract that had originally been the foundation of their relationship now felt flimsy and insubstantial. The walls between them were gone, and in their place was something much more powerful, a connection that neither of them could deny. They had crossed a line, and neither of them knew how to turn back. As they made their way back inside, neither of them spoke much. They both knew that what had just happened was a turning point. And now, there was no going back. The contract was no longer enough to keep them apart. And the question now was, where would they go from here? The days that followed were filled with tension, but also a strange sense of calm. Nathaniel and Sophia were still navigating the delicate line between what was real and what was merely a contract. They spent their time as usual, attending events, making appearances, and keeping up the illusion for the outside world. But inside, something had undeniably changed. The small moments of quiet between them, the shared glances, and the occasional touch that lingered just a little too long, all served to complicate what was supposed to be a simple arrangement. They were both beginning to acknowledge what they had been trying so hard to avoid. This was no longer just business. And neither of them knew what to do with it. One evening, after a particularly grueling business dinner, Nathaniel found himself back at the mansion, sitting in the darkened living room, a glass of scotch in hand. He wasn't alone. Sophia had joined him, sitting across from him on the couch. There was a stillness between them, an unspoken understanding that things had changed. Neither of them knew how to address it, but it hung in the air like a heavy weight. "You've been quiet tonight," Nathaniel finally said, breaking the silence. His voice was softer than usual, a little uncertain. He wasn't used to opening up, especially not in this context, but the presence of Sophia, sitting across from him, was making him feel different. She made him feel more human, more real than he had in a long time. Sophia took a deep breath, setting her wine glass down on the coffee table. "I'm just thinking," she replied. "Thinking about how everything has changed. This wasn't supposed to happen." Her words were honest, and Nathaniel could hear the vulnerability in her voice. She wasn't just talking about their contract anymore, she was talking about how she felt, how he made her feel. For a moment, Nathaniel didn't know how to respond. He wasn't used to hearing her speak so openly. The Sophia he had gotten to know was clever, sharp, and often guarded, but this version of her, this softer, more vulnerable side, was disarming. He could feel his own walls starting to slip away. "I never expected any of this either," Nathaniel admitted, his eyes meeting hers. "When we started this arrangement, it was supposed to be simple. A business deal, no strings attached. But now, He paused, trying to find the right words. Now, it feels like I'm in over my head. Sophia could feel the weight of his words, and it made her chest tighten. She had been trying so hard to keep things professional, to remind herself that this was just a temporary arrangement, but hearing him say that he was feeling the same way made her heart ache. Maybe she wasn't the only one who was starting to fall for the illusion that had become so much more than they had ever expected. "I don't know what this is, Nathaniel," she whispered, her voice barely audible. "But I can't keep pretending that this is just business. Not when everything between us feels so real." Her words were a confession, and in that moment, she knew she couldn't take them back. The truth had slipped out, and now they both had to deal with it. Nathaniel stood up abruptly, pacing across the room. His mind was racing. This wasn't what he had signed up for. He had told himself that he wasn't going to get emotionally involved, that this was just a way to keep up appearances. But somewhere along the way, things had changed. Sophia had become more than just a hired companion. She had become someone he relied on, someone he cared about, and that scared him. "I didn't want this to happen," Nathaniel said, his voice low, almost to himself. "But I can't deny that it has. And I don't know how to fix it." He ran a hand through his hair, frustrated by the complexity of his own feelings. He had spent so long building walls around himself to protect his heart, and now it felt like those walls were crumbling down, piece by piece, in front of the one person he never expected to let in. Sophia stood up as well, walking toward him slowly. She could feel the intensity in the air, the unspoken tension between them. She had never seen Nathaniel like this before, vulnerable, unsure, human. It made her realize that maybe she wasn't the only one who had been pretending. "You don't have to fix it, Nathaniel," Sophia said gently, placing a hand on his arm. "Sometimes things don't need fixing. Sometimes you just have to let them unfold, even if they don't go the way you planned." She could see the conflict in his eyes, the battle between what he thought he should do and what he felt. And for the first time in a long time, she wasn't afraid to acknowledge what was happening between them. Nathaniel looked down at her hand on his arm, then slowly met her eyes. The connection between them was undeniable, and in that moment, he knew there was no going back. They had crossed a line. And whatever came next, they would have to face it together. He took a deep breath, steadying himself. "I don't know what this means for us, Sophia. But I don't want to pretend anymore. Not with you." For the first time in a long time, Sophia allowed herself to smile. It wasn't a perfect moment, and they didn't have all the answers, but it was a start. And sometimes, that was all they needed. The air between them seemed to shift, a quiet understanding settling between them. They had been pretending for so long, but now, the truth was out. And no matter where this path would take them, they were both ready to face it. Together. The following days were filled with a sense of uncertainty, but also an unspoken promise. Nathaniel and Sophia had crossed a line that neither of them could ignore. What had started as a business arrangement, a contract between two people with separate goals, had evolved into something deeper, something they both struggled to understand. They still went through the motions of their roles, attending events, meeting people, and keeping up appearances, but the bond between them had shifted, and there was no pretending that things were the same anymore. At work, Nathaniel was more distracted than usual. His mind kept drifting back to Sophia, her smile, the way her laughter made him feel like he wasn't just a businessman, but a man who could connect with someone. It was unsettling for him. He had spent so many years keeping his emotions under tight control, never letting anyone get too close. But now, with Sophia, it felt impossible to maintain that distance. She had managed to slip under his guard in a way that no one else ever had. Sophia, for her part, was equally conflicted. She had been living in this strange, in-between world for weeks now. The lines between professional and personal had blurred, and she wasn't sure how to navigate this new reality. She still remembered the moment she had agreed to this arrangement. She had told herself it was just a job, a temporary fix to her problems. But now, with every passing day, she found herself questioning everything. She had never expected to care about Nathaniel, let alone feel the way she did. She knew it was risky, emotions could complicate everything, but she couldn't help how she felt. One evening, after a long day of meetings and public appearances, they found themselves alone in the mansion once again. The silence between them was thick with the weight of their unspoken feelings. Nathaniel sat on the edge of the sofa, his eyes focused on the papers in front of him, though he wasn't really reading them. Sophia stood by the window, looking out at the city below, lost in thought. Neither of them knew how to bridge the gap between them, how to confront what had changed. Sophia broke the silence, her voice soft. "Nathaniel," she said, turning toward him. "What are we doing? This isn't what we planned." Nathaniel's gaze lifted to meet hers. His face was unreadable, but there was a hint of something vulnerable in his eyes. "I know," he replied. "I didn't expect any of this. But here we are." For a long moment, neither of them spoke. It was as if they were both waiting for the other to make the first move, to say the words that would finally bring clarity to their situation. But the truth was, neither of them knew what to say. Sophia took a deep breath, walking over to sit beside him. "I'm not saying this is a mistake," she said carefully. "But I don't know how to handle all of this. I don't know where it's going, or what we're supposed to do now." Nathaniel exhaled slowly, his hand resting on his knee. "I don't know either," he admitted. "But I can't deny what's happening between us. And I'm tired of pretending it's just a contract. I think it's more than that. At least, for me it is." The words hung in the air, heavy and charged. Sophia turned to him, her heart racing. "For me too," she whispered, her voice barely audible. The confession was simple, yet it carried all the weight of their growing connection. Nathaniel reached out, his hand brushing against hers. This time, neither of them hesitated. Their fingers intertwined, and for the first time, the space between them felt right. No more pretending, no more walls. Just two people, connected by something real. As the night wore on, they talked, not about contracts or expectations, but about themselves, about their pasts, their fears, and their hopes for the future. The conversation flowed easily, and for the first time in what felt like forever, they both felt at ease. Nathaniel wasn't the powerful billionaire anymore. He was just Nathaniel, a man with flaws and hopes, and Sophia wasn't just the hired wife. She was Sophia, a woman who had dreams of her own, and who now found herself in the most unexpected of places. When the night came to an end, they didn't need to say anything more. The understanding between them was clear. They didn't know what the future held, but they were no longer afraid to face it together. The contract that had brought them together no longer mattered. What mattered now was what they had found in each other. And as they said goodnight, there was a sense of peace that neither of them had felt before. They didn't have all the answers, but for the first time, they didn't need them. The days that followed were filled with a new kind of tension, one that wasn't born of uncertainty, but of possibility. Nathaniel and Sophia had crossed a line, and though they both knew it, neither of them knew what to do with what had started to grow between them. They continued to fulfill their roles, attending high-profile events and keeping up appearances for the outside world. But behind closed doors, things had changed. The chemistry between them was undeniable, and they both felt it, even if they weren't ready to fully admit it. There was a quiet understanding between them now. They no longer felt the need to hide their emotions. It wasn't as if they were falling in love overnight, but there was something more, something genuine, starting to blossom in the space between them. They shared more moments alone now, little conversations that turned into longer ones, moments that stretched into hours. Every time they spoke, every time their eyes met, the bond between them grew stronger. Neither of them could deny it. One evening, after an extravagant gala, they found themselves alone once again at the mansion. The event had been filled with the usual smiles and pleasantries, but when the last guest had left and the doors were closed, everything shifted. The moment they were alone, the air between them felt different, charged, almost as if something unspoken was hanging in the balance. Nathaniel walked toward the living room, his mind racing with everything he had been feeling over the past few weeks. He had never been one to show vulnerability, but with Sophia, it was different. He felt like he could be himself, someone who didn't need to be perfect, someone who could make mistakes and not fear judgment. He hadn't realized how much he needed that until now. Sophia followed him, her heart beating faster as she walked across the room. She hadn't expected to feel this way, hadn't expected to feel like she belonged in Nathaniel's world, or in his life. But now, with every passing day, she realized that she was starting to care more deeply than she had intended. She had told herself she wasn't supposed to fall for him, but the truth was that she was already halfway there. They stood in the living room, not quite sure what to say. There was a moment of silence, but it wasn't uncomfortable. It was the kind of silence that spoke volumes, as if they were both trying to find the right words for what had become so clear to both of them. Finally, Nathaniel broke the silence. "I've been thinking," he said, his voice quiet, almost hesitant. "We've been pretending for so long. Pretending that this is just a business arrangement. But it's not. Not anymore." His eyes met hers, and there was a vulnerability in them that Sophia had never seen before. Sophia took a deep breath, her chest tightening. This was the moment. She had been waiting for it, but she hadn't known if she was ready. She had spent so much time convincing herself that this was just temporary, just something that would eventually fade. But now, standing in front of Nathaniel, with his eyes full of sincerity, she knew she couldn't keep pretending either. "I know," she said softly, her voice trembling slightly. "I feel it too. I've tried to fight it, tried to tell myself it was just the contract, but I care about you, Nathaniel. I care about you in a way I didn't expect." Her words hung in the air, raw and real. Nathaniel stepped closer, his heart racing. The distance between them had always been more than physical, it had been emotional, guarded, calculated. But now, all of that was starting to fall away. In this moment, with everything on the table, they no longer needed to hide. He reached out, his hand gently cupping her cheek. "I've been afraid," he admitted. "Afraid to let anyone in. But with you, I can't pretend anymore. You've changed everything for me, Sophia. I never thought I'd let someone get this close." But here I am. Sophia's breath caught in her throat as she looked up at him, feeling the intensity of the moment. This wasn't just the culmination of weeks of quiet tension, it was the beginning of something new. Something that neither of them had planned for, but both of them were now ready to embrace. For the first time, the walls that had separated them, the walls they had both built out of fear and past pain, began to crumble. What had started as a business arrangement had transformed into something more, something neither of them could deny. In that moment, there were no more words needed. No more explanations. They didn't need to figure it all out just yet. What mattered now was that they had both come to the same realization. They were no longer just playing roles, they were starting to build something real, together. The days after that night felt like a turning point for both Nathaniel and Sophia. They no longer needed to hide from their feelings, and though neither of them knew what the future held, there was an unspoken understanding between them. They had crossed the line between business and something deeper, something that felt real. The world they had built together, the one that had started as a contract, now felt like something that was growing into a genuine partnership. They spent more time together, not just attending events, but actually talking, laughing, and sharing moments that were personal, moments they hadn't shared with anyone else in a long time. One evening, as the sun set behind the mansion, Nathaniel and Sophia found themselves sitting together on the terrace. The air was warm, and the city lights started to twinkle in the distance. It felt peaceful, almost surreal. Nathaniel, looking out at the view, couldn't help but feel a sense of contentment he hadn't experienced in years. He had spent so long building his empire, keeping his emotions at bay, thinking that power and success were the only things that mattered. But now, with Sophia beside him, he realized that this connection, was what had been missing all along. Sophia, too, had changed. She had come into this arrangement with one goal, to escape the financial struggles of her past and find a way to move forward. But somewhere along the way, she had found something much more than just financial stability. She had found a man who saw her, really saw her, in a way that no one else ever had. She had found a partner, someone who made her feel valued and important. And as she looked over at Nathaniel, she realized she no longer saw him as just a billionaire or a businessman. She saw him as someone she cared about deeply, someone she was willing to build a future with. Nathaniel turned to her, his expression softening. "You know, I never thought I'd find myself in this situation," he said, his voice sincere. "I've always kept everything in control. But now, with you, I feel like I'm learning to let go of some of that control. I don't have all the answers, but I know that I want to find out what comes next, with you." Sophia smiled, her heart beating faster at his words. "I never thought I'd end up here either," she admitted, her voice full of emotion. "But I've never felt more certain of anything. I want to see where this goes too. I want to see what we can build together." They sat in comfortable silence for a few moments, just enjoying each other's company. For the first time, the uncertainty that had once loomed over them seemed to fade. There were no more questions about what they were or what they were supposed to be. They knew. They were two people, learning how to navigate life together, even if it hadn't gone according to plan. In the weeks that followed, they began to make their relationship a priority. Not just for appearances, but for themselves. They began to talk about the future, about what they wanted from life and from each other. It wasn't easy, and there were moments of doubt, but they both knew that they were building something stronger than they had ever imagined. And as they took the next steps together, the world around them began to feel a little smaller. They didn't need the luxury or the power to feel complete anymore. They had each other, and that was all that mattered. Nathaniel's empire was still thriving, but now he was focused on creating something more personal, something real. He was no longer just the billionaire businessman. He was Nathaniel, the man who had found love, not in a contract or in a business deal, but in a woman who had changed his life forever. Sophia, too, had found something she hadn't expected, a love that was built on trust and understanding, not a transaction. She had entered this arrangement to fix her financial struggles, but she had found something much more valuable, a partner who cared for her, someone who saw her for who she truly was. She was no longer the woman in a fake marriage. She was the woman who had found a home in someone's heart. And as the months passed, with each step they took forward, Nathaniel and Sophia knew one thing for certain: they had found something real. Something that had started as a simple contract had transformed into a love story neither of them would ever forget.